everyone, my name is Cody Baynert, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite albums of 2023 so far. Just to let you know, this is a very, very rough list at the moment. It is very subject to change. Maybe albums that I've already listened to would grow on me enough to reach this top 10, or I will discover new stuff down the line that will take over this top 10 by the end of the year, etc., etc. From what I have listened to and what I have enjoyed, these are the 10 picks that I would personally go for. In terms of rules for this, there aren't that many. The main rule that I have is that I don't allow myself to have more than one album per band, but that shouldn't be too difficult, and genre doesn't really matter to me, so yeah, anyways, let's get started. First up, we have Ryuichi Sakamoto with his latest and also, tragically, final album, 12. This is probably one of the most emotionally charged and vulnerable records of the year, if not also of recent memory. I'm sure most of you already have a fair understanding as of my reasoning behind this, but for those of you who don't, this is a collection of ambient drone and neoclassical pieces recorded from 2021 to 2022, shortly after Sakamoto was diagnosed with rectal cancer. And that's not the only context that makes this thing feel incredibly tragic. This thing was also released on his birthday, which has a pretty direct parallel with David Bowie's Black Star from back in 2016, which makes sense considering that they both starred in the same movie together, which was Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. And also, this album was released around the time that Sakamoto was going through a very unsure period in the final moments of his life where he wasn't sure how much longer he was going to live. And so, with all this context in mind, what initially seems like a very lovely ambient and neoclassical record along the lines of what Harold Budd and Brian Eno would come up with back in the 1980s becomes this very emotionally charged and heartfelt meditation on life and death, not just through the very somber and at times mournful yet also weirdly blissful ambient drone and piano pieces, but also because of other elements of the way that this whole thing was recorded. For Sakamoto would leave in extra bits of things that were likely unintentionally recorded, such as his breathing or him arriving on his piano before playing it. Almost like he is trying to emphasize to himself that at the time he was still alive and making music. Rest in peace, Mr. Sakamoto. I do wish the best for his family, and I do hope that he is in a better place right now. Next up, speaking of ambient, we have the latest collaboration record between Lossel and Lawrence English, titled Colors of Air. Two of ambient and experimental music's most prominent and talented artists team up to explore different tone colors and textures, utilizing recordings of a century-old pipe organ to create a series of provocative, immersive, and beautiful ambient pieces, where each song feels as if it is representing a different tone or shade, resulting in a, quite frankly, very colorful yet also very meditative listen. From the more mournful and almost at times funeralistic pieces such as Aqua or Gray, to the very expansive and almost existential sounding Black, to the very tense yet hypnotic and cinematic closer that is Magenta. This thing is thoroughly engaging, yet also easy to get lost in from beginning to end. Up next, we have Hubris with The One Above. I have been following this instrumental, progressive, and ambient post-rock band for about 5 or 6 years now, but this to me is their best work to date. It is comprised of 4 lengthy 9 to 13 minute pieces, and believe me when I say those lengths are justified, for they are masters of creating incredibly hypnotic, rousing, and emotive builds and crescendos that keep you on the edge of your seat from beginning to end, and also deeply move the listener. They also have a brilliant way of utilizing these progressive, infused passages that feel very reminiscent of bands like Meniscus, or even like other more like prog metal bands occasionally, such as Animals as Leaders. While they do utilize relatively straightforward builds and crescendos that are typically expected of post-rock, they are executed and handled so tastefully and also very smartly to have such interesting songwriting to the point where the builds and crescendos don't feel as overly predictable as they should be, resulting in a deeply beautiful record that I've gone back to quite a few times, especially while driving at night. It is just a powerful soundtrack for doing something like that, and I highly recommend it if you're into ambient or progressive post-rock. Next up, we have Ne Obliviscaris with Exhul. This was one of my most anticipated records of this year before we even got into January. For Ne Obliviscaris have been one of my favorite progressive and technical death metal bands for many years now, and this album continues to show their talents and their just absolutely top-notch skills of creating captivating, cinematic, and dynamic prog metal epics that keep you intrigued, engaged, and moved from start to finish. Their utilization of neoclassical elements, both in terms of the instrumentation as well as their musical dynamics and songwriting, is absolutely stunning, and the musicianship from every single band member is absolutely incredible. They have such a great way of just making sure that everything feels like it is serving the music and the music alone, resulting in another just absolutely masterful prog metal banger from one of the best bands in this particular scene right now. Next up, speaking of prog metal, we have Sermon with Of Golden Verse. With their sophomore album, Sermon take everything that made their debut, Birth of the Marvelous, so interesting, and expands on and refines those qualities in nearly every possible way. The songwriting is more varied, it's tighter, it's more dynamic. The entire album structure feels incredibly cinematic. I almost feel like as if I'm watching a mini movie when listening to this whole thing from beginning to end. There are times where there aren't that many notes being played, but I feel like that just shows just how carefully they are able to craft their songs, for they know what notes to play at the right time to like build tension or release tension, etc., etc. They just do a brilliant job at utilizing the entire album's 48-minute runtime as tastefully and as carefully as possible, resulting in a sonic journey from beginning to end that takes you through several different amazing peaks and valleys that continues to feel really captivating on several repeat listens. If you love bands like Tool, Enslaved, Catatonia, or Opeth, and I would even argue Sleep Token, this is definitely a band that I would highly recommend checking out if you love very atmospheric, unique, and artistic prog metal. Next up, we have Ison with Stars and Embers. I declared this my potential album of the year when I reviewed this bad boy. And honestly, that statement still stands pretty well. This is a 72-minute opus of beautiful, provocative, and incredibly expansive space ambient, shoegaze, and post-rock, with some occasional touches of doom metal during the heavier moments of this record. This thing is fucking awesome. The instrumentation, the layering of soundscapes is absolutely stunning. It's moving. It's sometimes, like, so beautiful that it genuinely brings me to tears. And that sense of emotion is brought to even further heights thanks to the phenomenal vocals from Lisa Cuthbert, as well as different guest vocalists such as Circle and Wind, Dimming, and Michael Stan from Dark Tranquillity fame. And yeah, this whole thing is just a giant, awesome, and powerful trip through the cosmos, pretty much. And it's very difficult for me to really, land right back on Earth after its final moments are over. Next up, we have Bell Witch with The Clandestine Gate. After releasing their incredibly powerful masterpiece that was Mirror Reaper back in 2017, their follow-up is the first part of a 3-album trilogy titled Future's Shadow, and this first part alone is literally the same length as the 83-minute Mirror Reaper. Holy crap. Regardless, this piece is awesome. In a very similar way to Mirror Reaper, this giant epic of an album demands your patience, but also rewards it just as much. You're constantly put through these really interesting doom metal and sometimes progressive tinged passages with these heavy, sludgy, immersive wall of sound guitars combined with utilization of these kind of almost hymnal or chanted vocals and some extra flourishes from the keyboards, making for a frankly overwhelming but also just incredibly emotional and beautiful piece of funeral doom metal and sludge metal that leaves me feeling like I've been through like a giant sonic journey every single time I listen to it. Bell Witch, in my opinion, remains my favorite modern doom metal band, and I am so fucking stoked for whatever the hell Future Shadow Parts 2 and 3 are going to bring. Next up, we have Eluvium with Whirring Marvels in Consensus Reality. One of my favorite ambient as well as neoclassical composers returns with another stunning, moving record that puts a little bit more emphasis on the more classical-oriented aspects of Eluvium's sound, resulting in something that kind of feels like a mixture of Max Richter with Tony Banks, with enough of Eluvium's own personality injected in there as well. The songs are concise, they're masterfully composed, as well as incredibly varied, and also the whole thing, when combined together, just results in a larger-than-life one-album whole. The production is beautiful, the layering of sounds as well as symphonic arrangements is just mind-blowingly beautiful and really, and at times also makes me cry. Yep, just another really awesome record from this really awesome composer, and yeah, Eluvium really has yet to miss, in my opinion, and I am highly anticipating whatever the hell Eluvium comes up with next. Next up, we have Amina Rod with the Amenzl Rise. This Devin Townsend-infused progressive death metal band made a record that is really overwhelming and chaotic and, quite frankly, very all over the place, yet still just coherent enough to result in a thoroughly engaging and also very cinematic experience from beginning to end. While Devin Townsend is the most prominent influence, I'm occasionally reminded of bands like Slice the Cake or Gojira or Between the Buried and Me, and I can even occasionally pick up on some kind of like dissonant avant-garde metal flourishes, kind of along the lines of Imperial Triumphant. And while their compositions are very chaotic and unpredictable, they're still scarily coherent to the point where the whole thing just feels like it is telling just a giant, crazy, overwhelming story, making this thing feel stupidly thrilling, like a giant 69, 70-minute fucking prog metal roller coaster. The performances are tight, the production is huge, the vocals are incredible, and yeah, if you're looking for stuff that is along the lines of the aforementioned bands that I name dropped, please do yourself a favor and check this thing out, especially since this band is criminally fucking underrated. They deserve more love, okay? Come on, guys. Do better. And last but not least, we have Paul Simon with 7 Psalms. Paul Simon was one of the first artists that I learned to really appreciate when I was pretty young. And so inherently I will connect with anything that he would put out to some level. But man, this thing is a very special record. While this one is still very clearly a kind of folky singer-songwriter record, kind of along the lines of what he would do with Simon and Garfunkel, this thing takes on a more progressive and also more conceptual approach, for it is, in a similar way to Bell Witch, a one-track album comprised of 7 individual movements that kind of flow into each other. And a lot of the elements that makes Paul Simon's music so special is already present, such as his very kind of comforting singing voice. And while you can definitely hear his age, you can also hear a lot of the typical sweetness in his singing as well. Along with that, his lyricism, his poetry, his wordplay is top-notch as always, top of the game. He makes me feel articulately inferior by comparison because he definitely words good. The production is, very well recorded, mixed, produced in a very professional manner, but there's still a very intimate human touch to the album's sound, which is what makes a lot of singer-songwriter style music so appealing to me in the first place. The instrumentation is very lush and immersive and evocative from start to finish, and the way that the piece kind of repeats and iterates on core themes as it progresses really helps to tastefully tie the whole thing together as a cohesive whole. On top of that, there's this genuine kind of sense of very peaceful and mature melancholy and sadness that the whole thing is drenched in. But the whole thing doesn't ever feel like it is wallowing in misery at all. Yeah, this whole thing is just awesome. It's a very special record in my opinion, and the fact that Paul Simon is in his 80s and is just as brilliant and also emotionally honest of a songwriter as he was back in the fucking 1960s, that is honestly pretty mind-blowing to me. So yeah, those are my top 10 albums of 2023 so far. Please let me know in the comments down below, what is your top 10? Were there any albums that I missed or didn't talk about? If so, please feel free to share your top 10 as well as any albums that you think would be up my alley, etc., for there's a good chance that some things that you recommend would end up on my end of the year list by the end of 2023. And as always, please feel free to like and subscribe and also comment as I mentioned before. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!